Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining us to our monthly webinar. This is a very exciting one because we are actually teaming up with RI Bio. Glenn, who's I don't know what your title is, president of RI Bio.
Anything you want to call me.
Okay.
The
Um,
official is executive director, but it seems a way too formal.
okay. Yeah, well, executive director sounds a little sassier than president. So yeah, um, Glenn took this role over maybe 6 months ago and has made really good progress in kind of the transformation 3 months, of the organization. We actually are doing a project together called AIM. It's AI Momentum, where we're helping our AI membership organization kind of get up to speed on how to leverage technology. And as part of that, obviously, we have some best practices. I don't know, Glenn, if you want to do a 2-second introduction to AIM from
Yeah,
your
definitely.
side.
So, quick introduction to myself. As Gregor introduced, I am Glenn Robertelli. I'm the new executive director here at Rhode Island Bio. I am here to help everybody on this call. So, my job is really to help grow the ecosystem of life sciences here in Rhode Island and southeastern New England, whether that's biotech, medtech, digital health, or just generally entrepreneurship. I'm here to be helpful and proud to be working with Loft on the AIM Momentum program. So this program was actually started before I got involved as the executive director. But the mission is to bring some AI or artificial intelligence projects into life sciences here in the Rhode Island area with the support of Rhode Island Commerce and the Rhode Island Life Science Hub. It's essentially a bespoke project working with individual companies to determine their projects or services that could use some sort of either artificial intelligence or machine learning algorithms to improve their internal or external projects. Happy to sort of talk about that after the call with Gregor one-on-one to see if you guys are interested. It is a completely free program with the support of Rhode Island Commerce. So happy to talk about that offline. Thanks, Gregor.
Perfect. Yeah, a couple quick announcements. Clotilde, if you can go to the next panel. Um, we actually have another webinar about the Forging the Future of Mobility in person this Thursday at Loft at the headquarters. Hope you guys can sign up for that. And also, we do these monthly series about technology, entrepreneurship, all kinds of different aspects. If you go to the next page, yeah. Also, after the Thursday event, we have our yearly Loftoberfest party. I hope if you're in the Rhode Island area, you can come by and enjoy a beverage and talk to designers and technologists at our headquarters. And then, yeah, also always, sign up for our newsletter. You can subscribe on Loft.design to keep up to date on, the latest in thought leadership and design and technology. I'm going to make an introduction to our panelists and we get started. I'm going to actually start with Tim, since Tim, you have a Rhode Island connection. Tim, I've known Tim for, I don't know, 15 years, but we go back to kind of like a previous startup where we did a lot of work together. And Tim is actually from the New England region, now living in California. We worked together actually on a image AI driven ecosystem called LifePrint, which was really more like a consumer facing product. But Tim since then actually started working with a company called EasyUp, where we've done a lot of work on the UX side together. And EasyUp is really on the leading front of AI integration in life sciences. Maybe, Tim, you can talk a little bit about your role and your background and your connection to Rhode Island.
Yeah, glad to do that. Well, first and foremost, I went to the University of Rhode Island, so I'm well connected back there, and glad to hear about some of the initiatives that are going on AI in Rhode Island. I'm the chief product officer at EasyUp, and as Gregor mentioned, we're really focused in pharma, and what we're trying to do is get to drugs to market more quickly by offering content generation services for things like clinical trials, right? And to put this in perspective, there's calculations that say for every day that you can move this process forward by a day or save a day, it could be anywhere from $1 to $5 million in revenue. for a pharma company, not to mention you're potentially saving lives or helping enhance people's lives as well. So it's a really powerful ROI, and we're super excited to use a variety of types of AI in an enterprise platform to support big pharma companies worldwide.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think Tim also you pretty much work with all the big companies in the game, right? Like Eli Lilly, Novartis. So
We've publicly announced engagements with at least 6 of the top 20 pharma companies in the world, and of course, working
okay,
on.
excellent. Sounds perfect. Well, I'm gonna also now go over to Germany to Tina. And we interviewed actually Tina 6 months ago for our newsletter, and we're very happy to have her back. Tina actually has a connection with Clotilde, our product director of product, and started really as a PhD in computer science and artificial intelligence, and worked at Philips many years, and now actually leads the microimaging solutions at Evidence Scientific. And I'd love to hear from you a little bit what your work is there and how you leverage AI.
Yeah. So yes, my experience goes back to Philips and before that with Siemens Healthineers. So I did a lot of work on radiology side, and what excited me and brought me here to Evident. So Evident is, started from Olympus and traditionally focused on microscopes for research, life science research and clinical. And now we are really into the digital scanners and AI, right? So this is where, at this point of time, we are focusing on AI for new research, for instance, for pathology images, really to understand the disease state, the disease progression, at the same time to help pharma, but more importantly also with clinical diagnosis to understand what are the right treatments for the patient, as well as to look at companion diagnostics. Is the treatment really working? So this is exactly where we're working with pharma, but also a lot of clinical hospitals. So that's what's really exciting for me.
Excellent. Yeah, and I mean, imaging especially has been kind of on the forefront of AI, right? Really. And I'd love to kind of dive into that deeper. But very excited to have you on the panel. And last but not least, Tucker. Tucker actually has a really interesting background coming out of industry, working at Ford Motor Company and Visteon Corporation, but then really went into academia, and now is actually also a technical founder for AdaIQ, which is an exciting startup in the Boston area. And I'd love to hear a little bit, Tucker, about your journey and also what you're doing at AdaIQ. Oh, you're muted.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. So my background predominantly in my academic research is how do you improve the innovation process? And of course, that cuts across every industry from drug discovery to consumer products, right? And I think we're in a really interesting time now where we're seeing the potential to see dramatic improvements in workflow. Your work, Gregor, and Loft, what the improvements you've seen in the front end of development of perhaps over 50% cycle time improvement for those front-end design things is fantastic. I think we're just going to see that accelerate in almost every industry. So that's what I'm predominantly interested in. That's what we do at AdaIQ. We've taken working on, again, the front end of new product development and seeing what we could do to use AI and machine learning to improve understanding customer insights, and then embedding that into new designs and optimizing and predicting how people will feel about new products. And I think that that's just an example of how AI will really impact very specific activities within the entire value chain of innovation, and certainly including life sciences.
Now you're muted, Gregor.
Sorry, I'm muted. I know. I think that's what I want to maybe touch upon first is this idea of, AI gives you an opportunity to have a large amount of data sets across different inputs and, really create a common thread that really helps you speed up processes. I know Tucker, when you guys are speaking of AI IQ, I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you're taking all kinds of different data sets and then, making it actionable for product managers, designers, developers, scientists. That what does AI give you that other technologies don't give you, right?
Well, maybe I'll just start off with the AI IQ example. So let's look at consumer preferences, right? So there's obvious data like customer reviews that are generated online, but there's also real data that's generated through IoT applications and in-store data. There's sales data, there's returns data, there's influencer data. So there's all sorts of different pieces of large amounts of data set that when combined together in a way where we can apply reinforcement learning, we're actually enabling us to get a level of perspective and identifying interesting patterns that we couldn't do before. And I think that's for us at AI IQ, that's what's the most valuable or interesting, is that we're connecting very disparate pieces of information and learning from that.
Right. Yeah, Tim, I mean, I want to jump over to you because obviously that's really what EasyUp is also doing is, if you have clinical trials, there's a large amount of data sets of different outcomes, different reactions to drugs and other things. I'd love to hear from you how EasyUp is kind of, making that mess, efficient and actionable.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And, we use a variety of AI models and types. So we do both symbolic and generative AI in our platform. And this goes back to if you think about a pharma, clinical trials, patient information, right? This is all very critical stuff, and it's important when you're doing analysis, when you're writing content, when you're delivering these kinds of reports to FDA, EMA. You have to get them right? You can't have hallucinations and large problems in these reports. And going back actually to the UI UX stuff too, it's really important to build a UI UX that works well for the user personas, right? So we spend a lot of time with that as well, making sure that people can use AI in interesting ways to deliver the results that they're interested in getting. So for me, our customers' data sets are really, it's just unbelievably critical information. And we can learn from all these data sets, but we also, have to be careful in how we use these data sets to get the results for our customers, right?
Yeah, and I think especially with, drugs, you are basically tracking a ton of different data sets, and also you have to be very accurate, obviously, because any kind of problem in kind of the reporting can have disastrous consequences, right? So it's a whole other rigor on AI, right? That if ChatGPT gets something wrong, it's probably not the end of the world, right? There's a way to get back to it. But if your FDA report is wrong, it's a disastrous outcome.
Yeah, the bar is super high for sure. The other piece, by the way, I'm sure all the folks in AI are dealing with similar issues that I am, but it's about the data itself, the formats that they come in. Lots of companies, even large pharma companies, don't have mature data programs, right? I'm sure that's believable. And so we actually have to bridge a lot of those data gaps. So we've done a lot of work just in data manipulation and making sure that our platform can ingest any kind of data that we need to ingest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's where data science and AI meet, right? I want to go over to Tina because I think obviously if you have X-ray data, let's say of somebody who's getting screened for a tumor, there's a critical component that you gotta get that right when the AI algorithm is detecting it. So how do you guys make sure, or what is your what have you learned over the years in how to play that game so that you can get critical results right?
Yeah. Maybe I'll mention a little bit about the radiology side and now what I'm learning also and seeing in pathology, right? So first of all, on radiology, when we started the whole AI journey, whether it's Siemens or Philips, first of all, realize that you need a large variety of data. And sometimes it's even hard to get all the different complex cases. You want the outlier cases. You want to be able to fine tune and improve that precision, right? And then over time, with generative AI and so on, now we also have ability to create the synthetic data. Obviously, you cannot use synthetic data for, let's say, the final clinical validations of the algorithm, but nevertheless, you can still use that to stress test the algorithm, make sure that you really thought about various outlier cases. So those are kind of changes and evolutions that happened over time, because in the beginning, we really tried to get a lot of clinical data from various collaboration customers and partners, and it's not always easy to get that amount of data. The other challenges, I think I think Tim and Tucker also mentioned, you want to make sure that you have the results seamlessly integrated at the point of decision making. So the user experience is so important. And in the beginning, probably many of us did not focus so much on how are you showing the AI results? How do you make sure that users are building that trust and they don't feel threatened, or they don't make a wrong diagnosis? And all this becomes so relevant. And of course, radiology went through that journey of the last years, and I feel there's a big uptick in adoption. And now that I moved into pathology, and this is where, again, it's imaging, but on a micro imaging level, you're looking at a tissue, you're looking at a cell level, you're looking within a cell, right? Like a genetic level information. This is the new space. You will see that pathology AI, even though it's progressing, and I'm sure at some point we'll have a conversation around regulatory and so on, this becomes very challenging, right? So if you look at pathology space today, there are not yet many cleared medical device sort of AI yet. There are few examples now with the 510K or definitely a CE IVDR, but it's challenging. Again, you need a lot of data. You need to make sure that the algorithm works with scanners and vendors of different types, that the AI is, harmonized, and it's not always the case. You have to fine tune for different scanners today. That's the situation today, right? AI algorithms, you still have to fine tune for the different image types. And I think Tim also mentioned like the data formats. Can you believe, like in pathology, not yet everybody is supporting DICOM, right? In radiology now, you're like, hey, you don't have to discuss about the data format. That's the format. And now these formats are still coming. So those kind of challenges are still there. But maybe to wrap up this question, ultimately what is very exciting is you see the breakthroughs in research. I mean, we have our true AI platform, which we also offer to our research partners, let's say pharma and so on, where they can use that platform to have new discoveries. And those discoveries are saving lives, right? We are able to understand individualized treatment options, a particular, whether they are, can you give them a particular treatment? Is it possible to give them an immunotherapy or a less aggressive treatment? This kind of discoveries is game changing, and that's what motivating us to accelerate AI further, even though the journey ahead is not easy, right? So
Right.
Let me pause at that.
I have a follow-up question for you, and I want to actually then maybe also ask Tim, because I know a little bit about that struggle. But AI, obviously you want to have consistent inputs, you want to have consistent data sets, you want to hone your model on those data sets. However, every hospital has slightly different ways of taking data sets. Every company is slightly different in the way that their processes work. How challenging is that aspect of the AI development, that basically the inputs are never clean, right? I know that you probably work with different hospital systems. I'd love to hear from you, and then bring it over to Tim.
Yeah, I mean, if I begin to explain all the challenges, that will take a long time. So really, even if I explain a few things, you will figure out how challenging it is, right? So first of all, just imagine this. In pathology, just let's take a simple tissue example. You're analyzing a tissue. The tissue is pre-processed in various ways, right? I mean, as simple as how you stain or apply reagents. So even that has differences across the different vendors, right? Then comes the scanners that's actually scanning the tissue to a digital image. Each of these scanners also have totally different optics, image processing techniques, and so on. And then out comes an image where in the past, at least for the last couple of years, even the data formats were proprietary. Now everybody is standardizing to DICOM. So at least there is one standard that's coming out, but I wouldn't say the DICOM is already mature and final. And pathology is still enhancing. Then comes the next step for an AI algorithm, provider or creator. You need to be able to test with a large variety of these images coming from all kinds of vendors, scanners, plus multiplied by the variances in the staining, which could be even different from the morning to the evening, right? And that kind of variations. So I think it's a very challenging task that the AI vendors have. That adds actually complexity also to regulatory. So coming into this space, what I find fascinating and challenging is, in the end, you are ending up clearing a scanner with an image provider, with an AI algorithm. So it's like all kinds of combinations you end up clearing, which is not scalable. That also impacts the speed of new innovations, right? So this is what I would say is challenging. People are trying to understand and coming up with solutions step by step. But to complement some of the companies and AI vendors out there, they're coming up with AI models that help you standardize the image, as simple as standardizing or harmonizing in a way that the AI algorithms can improve its precision. So those kind of AI algorithms are also coming in as an intermediate step. So yeah, image, you have a standardization AI model that improves the quality, that harmonizes, that then forms the basis of the clinical AI that can actually help with the diagnosis, right? So that's another idea that's coming up, and some vendors are playing in that space and doing well as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, Tim, and I'd love to hear from you because obviously every pharma company has a slightly different workflow and slightly different data sets. How you guys manage all those inputs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we deal with lots of unstructured data and structured data from clinical trials. And there's some standardization, right? But the reality is not every company does things the same way. And I was smiling when Tina was talking because I feel her pain, right? As much as everybody wants to get together in pharma and come up with these standards and really mature this along, that takes years, right? And we're not even close. And so what we have to do in the meantime is take RTF files from old studies or Word files or PDF files. And then even though the clinical data is in similar formats, the way that we get it is not. And so we have to kind of either use ETL methods, if you guys are familiar with extract, transform, load methods, or what's interesting to me now is agents, right? So we're at a precipice now with generative AI where agents can be pretty interesting in the future for things like data management, whether it's the acquisition part or the transformation part. So we're looking at that too to simplify the process for ourselves. But the reality is, once again, we can't use a process if we can't say that it's accurate, right? And doesn't change the outcome of the reporting. So this is where we have to have a real critical eye. And we do spend kind of a lot of time making sure that we set that bar really high.
For sure. Yeah, Tucker, I mean, I know we've talked about this in the past, like you guys are building these models for certain industries, right? Some of them are regulated, some of them are really more consumer facing, but all of them have very different inputs, right? And there's always the struggle of getting that right. And I know you're also, working in academia. Maybe you can share a little bit of your journey at Ada IQ, how you guys are bringing up a new model, right? But as you're kind of getting ready for an industry or for a certain application.
Sure. Well, one of the things I'm sure that Tim and Tina would agree with this is that not one tool or ML or AI method will do everything, right? So we approach the problem of the front end of innovation as several different problems and activities to tackle that require specific AI or ML solutions to do each one. And I think that breaking down of tasks means that whatever solution we have in our platform is multimodal, right? So we have multiple sources of data. We also have multiple sources of how we're actually taking those inputs and then tuning the models and having outputs that reinforce each other, right? And I think that's generally how we see this moving forward. in our particular application of consumer product development. So, but regardless if it's life sciences or if it's consumer products, the way that SKUs are represented at every different retailer is different. The way that those sorts of product lifecycle management tools and how all this is structured on the back end is a challenge, right? So it's almost taking an application at a time. And I think that we all will struggle with, not only as Tim has mentioned on data structure and processing, but also commonization and what Tina had mentioned and the difficulty of training different data sets. So there's not, if you think about an industry, we're still in an infancy period, right? There's a huge amount of innovation, a huge amount of dynamicism, but we haven't coalesced yet. So I would imagine if you look at in comparing it to the internet boom, we're probably around 1993, 1994, maybe. So there's a long way to go between that and having a bunch of stable platforms and market leaders in certain areas of industry. So that means there's a lot of experimentation. So that's a long-winded kind of non-answer to your question of, our approach is deliberate, but also careful to understand what we can do right now and where we want to go in the next 2 to 3 years. And I will say that it's not necessarily easy because we're working on one thing and there's sub vendors or others working on others that are bypassing what we've done already over the last 6 months. So it is challenging to knit together what we're doing internally, balancing external relationships and partnerships and seeing where this is going over the next 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, actually, maybe for all of you. It's like, how do you even put a technology roadmap together if you constantly have evolving sub pieces that are changing and you're putting your resources towards something that becomes obsolete in 6 months, right? Tim, you mentioned agents. I've heard a lot of technologies kind of talking about the future of agents and how they could potentially actually take some of these sub pieces and standardize them, right? Tina, have you had any experience using agents in your process?
Yes, but maybe, yeah, that's not a particular example that makes sense to quote here, but I like the point that Tucker ended with as well, is things are evolving so fast. So what do you focus on in the roadmap? So that I was intrigued by that point because we are addressing the same thing. Because every day, today it's agents and of course, different kinds of large language models. Do we jump from one to another? And then, what is the strategy? And of course, they're also intensive, like compute intensive. They're expensive. It's not that we can just keep jumping from one to another and evaluate, right? So this is where I think we are also saying internally, right, where focus on your core and be very clear where you wanna partner and work with others. Don't try to do everything ourselves, right? So I think this ecosystem workflow partnership model is very relevant nowadays. And then again, focus on your core, meaning being very clear what is it that you want to differentiate with, which you think you can. It's not completely dependent on the trends that are coming out every few months, right? So if we keep chasing that, it's so hard to even have a roadmap and a vision. So that's also a big part of the exercise we've been doing to really identify those differentiation cores and where we want to partner, right? So I wanted to mention that rather than take an agent example. Yes, we tried this and that, and then there is another models. I wouldn't say some great example that really worked. Maybe Tim or Tucker has a good example over there.
Well, I just want to hear from Tim on this, but our perspective is that how important architecture is, right, and understanding the importance of modularity and flexibility, because if we have the ability to put in one LLM versus another, or one terms of visualization tool versus another, that's going to help us because we can't necessarily control the pace with which new technology is coming, but we can control how that is all put together and how that meshes with our data. And I'd love to hear Tim's thought on that with his perspective on platforms.
Yeah, so I think you nailed it on the architecture side. We've kind of taken the approach of being model agnostic, right? So we have a centralized LLM service, and we can plug in anything that we want. It could be Amazon Bedrock, it could be Microsoft Azure, and I have access to all the state-of-the-art models and in some cases open source models too. So we watch and see how these models progress. But when in terms of taking things to production, you have to be really careful, right? Because you can't bring something new to production every month. These customers can't handle that. And so we kind of work on a 6-month cycle there on the LLM side, right? We pick what we want to do, we've kind of define it, and then we stick with it for a while. And then we take a look to see what the advances are in these models. And depending on the advancement, we might try something new, but we're really critical about that. And let's face it, I think, Tucker, you brought this up earlier, but we're in the early stages of using AI in production with lots of applications. And I think there's lots we can do already with the progress that LLMs have made, and we're doing that. We're trying not to get distracted, but innovate as quickly as we can. So we do lots of POCs in our teams just to try things out. But we'll definitely vet something very thoroughly before we make a change in the production environment.
Maybe just to add to your point, Tim, the complexity is also one is the POCs and doing the prototypes and so on, right? The other is for us to bring it from the research world to also to the clinical world. So that, in the clinical world, still, it's like locked algorithms, right? I mean, definitely we cannot have an underlying LLM model that gives you a different answer each time. So even having the right guardrails and right now, it's still, we're not able to bring all the latest trends into the clinical world. At the same time, regulatory becomes more complex in that case. The way we have to do post-market surveillance or the monitoring of the solution, that we also have to think about how are we going to get that feedback from the real world and keep that model up to date. And it's different if the real world, if we're deploying a solution in-house and within our own business, where the data is in our control, versus deploying a solution with a partner side, right, or a customer or a hospital, where in the end you need that feedback in order to even keep that algorithm monitored and running in the most effective, optimal way. So that challenge is still very difficult. So we are all in that still phase of POCs and trying out early pilots, right?
Yep, I'd love to jump on that actually and ask about the FDA, right? Obviously, the FDA had conflicting opinions about using AI from, I would say the early honeymoons to maybe cracking down a little bit more on like data sets, or like the approval processes have kind of changed in recent years. Is that I mean, obviously, I would say the future of AI in healthcare is here. We all know it's going to have a huge benefit on, as Tim said, the speed of getting to market. Tina said also, we radiologists we're not training enough radiologists in the world, right? So an AI model can really help you kind of weed out a lot of these, I would say 80% threshold imaging solutions without a human intervention. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like where are we going from an FDA perspective. Do we feel it's going to get easier? It's going to get harder? Tina, maybe you can start.
Well, FDA is also learning, right? So I think we haven't reached that, the desired state together. So obviously, it's up to also all of us to provide that feedback, work together with them to help improve the guidelines and also standardize. But what I would say is, I mean, in simple terms of how I think about it is, on one hand, it's our responsibility to make sure that we have adequate data. First of all, we understand the use case clearly, adequate data in order to make sure that we are thoroughly validating the algorithms. The other important factor is being transparent. I mean, it's okay right now, we don't have to say that AI works in every possible scenario, right? But to be able to be transparent where it works, where it doesn't work. So that's also very important. Another aspect is really putting guardrails around the usability, user experience, and intuitiveness. So whenever we show the results, we make sure that the user, the end user, is empowered to make the right decision. They know when they're being well informed versus when they are not misguided, right? So those kind of user experience aspects become so critical. And last but not least, no matter how thoroughly we validate and we release and deploy it, to really get that feedback from the real world, make sure that we have a structured way of monitoring and releasing new updates, right? So these are at least for me, these are the simple steps that we need to follow. Easier said than done. Everything around that, like really ensuring that it works in every setting and so on, those take steps. It takes a lot of rigor and robustness in what we do. And I would do that incrementally, stepwise, while also working with FDA to see how we can improve this process. That's what I would put it, but it's no way easy. It's no way easy, right? So we are still in that steep learning journey, marching ahead. Yeah.
Right. Do you think, and maybe a follow-up question for you, and then maybe I have a question for Tim about this. Do you think that like startups have a better, easier time to do this than you at Olympus or at a bigger company,
No.
or you think the playing field is pretty equal?
I think it's I wouldn't say equal. Everybody has their advantages and disadvantages. Like if I name some as an example, right? What come to my mind? If a startup goes to the hospital and say, "Oh, I want to co-create with you. Can I get access to the data?" Of course, you can more easily get access to the data, I think. Whereas a bigger company, when you're going to the hospitals getting access to data, there's a whole lot of process rigor to apply, even to get access to the data in a compliant way with data privacy and everything being assured, right? And so on. That's a simple example. Another one may be, for example, maybe what's difficult for a startup is to really partner with a wide number of customers, get enough feedback from a wide number of stakeholders to make sure that they are going in the right way. That might be different for larger companies. We have like very strong collaboration partners, key opinion leaders. So for us, maybe easier to get like a wide number of input to make sure that we are vetting and really focusing on the most important use cases, right? So yeah, I'm just giving some examples of pros and cons. So it's not like one space is easier than the other, but maybe the startup can really go accelerate fast, right? Big companies, a lot of process, navigating the big ship is harder, whereas startups can go faster. But nevertheless, startups, maybe the quality and regulatory is harder to apply. There's so many things to do where a bigger company maybe has that experience. We can quickly bring from one product line to another, right? More sustainable processes and so on. So yeah, I would say pros and cons. Everybody has their place. But maybe sharing those learnings with each other and supporting each other from an ecosystem point of view, maybe is the way to grow and scale together.
Yeah, and Tim, to you, EasyUp was a startup like 12 years ago, and obviously you guys have been growing quite a bit, but still, I would say, what's your perspective on this? And obviously, you ran many startups. I think there is definitely an intrinsic acceleration advantage of being a startup, right? But at some point, right, where is the disadvantages, advantages converging?
Yeah, so well, to answer just real quickly the FDA EMA question, right? I think the short-term answer to all of that is human in the loop, right? Everything we do, even if we can automate everything in a clinical study report, we're not doing that today. We're having human in the loop. That way, the FDA or the EMA are confident if the human's there, the results are driven by the human analysis and not the AI. So that's the short-term answer. And that, of course, government will always trail, regulation will always trail AI. AI moves too fast. But I do see a future where more and more automation will be accepted by the FDA, and maybe they'll accelerate a little bit. I don't know, but I'm not counting on that, right? And then going back to data and the size of startups or large companies and dealing with pharma, I'm not sure I see a huge difference. To Tina's point, if you're working with a tier one pharma company, the process is immensely complicated to get any data out of them for use in your models or even data to validate if you're doing things correctly. So I don't think a startup, unless maybe there's some co-development or investment, and by the way, we've used that approach. Some of the large pharma companies have invested in us. So in that case, they're more willing to share more information because it's a if we win, they win as well as an investor. But yeah, I just think the bar is really high. And if you don't have access to data, as we all know, AI is not very useful. So that can be an issue for startups if they don't have a great story.
Yep. Yeah, Tucker, I mean, I know you kind of have an ongoing collaboration with Onshape, which is owned by PTC, which is a pretty large company. And obviously you guys are a startup. Maybe talk a little bit about kind of that dichotomy.
Yeah, well, I think it goes down to staging and maturity of a company. So, as an example, AIQ is a Northeastern spinout, and that has its just like many life sciences are spun out from our great R1 universities, right? But it doesn't matter what if you're in life sciences or not. Getting access to data is critical for training even the most new models, right? So, relationships are extremely important for that, be it with hospitals or with companies that maybe have a relationship with a university as an experiment. Those sorts of things are pretty important to at least get started. I think for our experience is that we wanted to try to accelerate the technology transfer process. And in order to try to do that was to partner with outside established companies as quickly as possible to establish legitimacy in what we're doing. And that was one of that was a primary focus of us was to try to identify particular industry verticals, but then also partners that may help us as we move from phase 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. And that's going to coincide with fundraising as well, right? So it's all interrelated. And I'm sure that Tim and Tina would agree with that. A year from now, when we have certain sources of revenue and probably are going to Series A, we'll be in a much different position to add different collaborators than we were in the very beginning when we were still in the university. So I just think you need to plan that proactively. And in our case, the relationship with PTC was to really help understand what their perspective is on 3D Gen AI, what a brand new company is doing, and how we might be able to work together, even on a limited basis in the beginning, but increasing the maturity of that and involvement in that relationship as we grow, right?
Right. Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left, so I want to go a little bit on the roadmap discussion. Obviously, we know that data is important. We know that, the technologies are changing. We know that kind of the horizon of AI is constantly maturing, and we see, new players, I would say, more galvanizing around certain technology platforms. Are we going to see the same thing we saw with big tech, where there's a couple big players that are going to dominate the AI game, and everybody else is really kind of falling on the wayside, getting bought, or kind of not being as relevant anymore? Or do we feel that this is really like what 1.0, where we haven't even seen the biggest startup hasn't even been funded yet, or hasn't been even started yet, right? I'd love to maybe start with Tim on that perspective, because I mean, you've been doing innovation and starting up companies for 30 years or 25 years. So is this the end of the curve of AI? Is this the beginning? Like, where are we going?
I'm generally an optimist. I love the idea of a two-person billion-dollar company in the future, right? With AI supporting that. We're a long way from that. But I talked to an editor this week, and he was asking me a lot of questions about, there's a lot of talk about LLMs stalling out. There's not enough data, and what's going to happen? Is this whole thing going to go sideways? And I just don't see it that way, right? LLMs are one of the most powerful types of technology ever released. And we all have lots to do still and using it for some pretty interesting applications. We haven't even scratched the surface on agents yet. And there's a lot of possibility. But so I think there's a lot of opportunity to use tools, RAG models, other tools to really do some interesting things, even with the technologies that exist today. But I'm also willing to bet that in the future, we'll find different ways. These large companies will find different ways to continue the acceleration. And if I look at the landscape for us, I don't just look at the state-of-the-art models, right? I see opportunities where, whether it's in agents or whether we have more mature models that are open source that we do more training on because we have a lot more data and experience. I think all these things come into play. I don't think it's just large companies, large models. You see companies like Hugging Face that are kind of the GitHub of kind of AI models, and I think the open source community is going to do great things as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting also that, some of the biggest tech companies actually release their, agents or their AI models as an open source platform, right? So we'll see a lot of stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Tina, I'd love to hear from you on the kind of the evolution of tech and where we're going.
Yeah. I think what might converge to a few players is more the platform, the models, the common building blocks, right? So these kind of technologies, I think it makes sense. Few players really doing well, probably hard for everybody to come into that game, including these models like the agents, LLMs, and so on, where we are saying it is pretty expensive to even create that, to maintain that, to train that, right? And even to get that data and compute and so on is damn expensive. Not many players can do that. They need huge investments. So I think in those spaces, it will converge to a few dominant players. On the other hand, what I believe that the end applications, the specific areas, whether it's research, clinical, industry, and every other end use applications, there I don't see a few dominant players, because you really need to understand the end use, the workflows, and be very specific for certain targeted use cases, right? So there I feel there'll be a lot more players. But then again, even if I take a concrete example, like in pathology right now, besides many examples which are in radiology, if I take in pathology, what I see is some players are really going with an LLM approach where you can analyze many different organs and tissue types, whereas others are coming up with algorithms very specific to a particular disease. Now, they do claim that the precision is the same, even if you go for various organs, but I would love to see that, does it really scale that level? Or is it better to go for particular algorithms for very specific use cases for disease diagnosis and treatment follow-ups and so on? So in short, I would say, definitely few dominant players when it comes to platform, infrastructure, and tools, which makes sense, also easier for us to collaborate. But then the use case specific places, there will be more players to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tucker, to hear your perspective on this as well.
So if you look at the history of innovation, is that when you have a new industry arise, if we can think of the life cycle of the industry as a clock face of 12 hours, and in the hours of 12 a.m. to 3 a.m., we're about 12:30 a.m. So we're very early on in the beginning of this industry. And regardless of the industry you look at, be it personal computers or the internet or genetics, doesn't matter. It's all very similar patterns. Is that we're in the very first quarter, early first quarter of that cycle, you have a huge explosion of new ventures. Eventually, over time, there'll be consolidation, there'll be bankruptcy, and by the time you get into that 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. period, there will be a few stable players with scalable net revenue positive positions. Think about the internet when you had eBays and Amazons and others survive the implosion in March 2000, right? So I think that you'll probably see, history shows us that you'll see the same pattern with AI. And I would agree with both Tim and Tina and their comments on that as well.
Sounds good.
But that doesn't mean we're having a hugely exciting time, right? And dynamics and lots of things going.
We are. And I think I mean, this is, in my lifetime, probably the biggest revolution I've seen, right? I mean, I kind of lived through the PC age, but that was longer, right? This is definitely like a completely emergence of a new type of industry that's touching everybody, right? If you are, and obviously, Glenn kind of brought this up. If you are a company, a startup that has never used AI in the past and now is waking up, November 19th, 2024, what's your advice? Where should they start? I'd love to start with, let's start with Tim.
Well, you may be dead already. I'm not sure. But
Well,
no,
but I mean, I would say in life sciences, many companies that are really, basically thinking about it, but have never used it, right? What's the easiest way to get started?
I think you're joking aside. Listen, you gotta. I'm still of this great belief that this is great technology, right? But it's just one technology in your tool belt. As a software company, or as we build software companies, we're solving problems, right, for users. And you've got to nail that first, right? Know your customer, solve the problems. The technology will fill in the back, right? But that being said, I would start out with taking a look at your use cases, trying to understand where generative AI, LLMs might be a good fit, and start doing some POCs. Start understanding what it can be good at and what it's not good at. And I would suggest also for people to, leverage the big players that have cloud-based infrastructure, right? AWS, Azure. You don't have to build everything from scratch, right? Use the stuff that's out there to get started, and see how far you can get with some of your early POCs. And then once you nail something, you build that into your product as soon as you solve a significant problem.
Yep, no, that's good. Tucker, what's your the future AI IQs in the world, or even a company that is, right now doing something in life sciences but has never used AI? What's your insights?
Well, one, I think you need to understand, as Tim had mentioned, I agree, understanding the use case and what are the activities that you want to augment, right? The next thing I would look at is what level of trust and expertise do you want from the outputs of the model? That's going to help understand, what kind of technology and what kind of partners you're going to need. The next thing that I think is you need to understand what kind of investment. Does it really make sense for you to spend millions and millions of dollars to build up your own AI data science team? Or do you want to start with, as Tim mentioned, POCs? Would you rather have relationships with newer ventures, with different labs at universities? And before diving in, just take a little bit of time, a couple months, understand the landscape, understand, as Tim mentioned, those use cases and where you can experiment quickly to learn more, right? And then use that to articulate your strategy going forward.
Sounds good. Yeah, Tina, what's your advice?
Yeah. Maybe I'm going to build on what Tim already started, and Tucker also captured some of that. So if I think of healthcare in a very simple way, when we think about value for our customers, we talk about improved patient outcome, lowering cost, enhancing experience, right? That's the three aspects. So the same way for a startup, just like Tim said, first of all, what is value for the end customer? What is actually, let's say, improving their performance? What is true outcome for them? If you really understand that use case, the second part is maybe to build on that is the willingness to pay. That's one of the challenges today. So great AI models, but if you take healthcare, if the customer doesn't get reimbursed for it, they're not going to be willing to pay unless you significantly reduce the effort on their side, that they're able to do double the cases and so on, right? So in other words, you always have to understand, is it the use case? What is the willingness to pay? What is it that you're really improving for them? And then, of course, like also Tucker alluded to, it's like the cost, right? What do you want to take off the shelf, right? Leverage the existing models and Bedrock and other APIs and so on out there. You don't want to do that yourself. and really think about your cost again as a startup, right? You want to be very clear on how you're going to improve that solution. Is it scalable? Otherwise, this is not a business impact for you. So if you really understand that and ultimately be able to delight the customer with user experience with AI, there's a big aspect of the customer experience. If you're able to delight them with that experience, then I think you got a good starting point to build upon.
Yep. No, that's really good advice, because I think the reimbursement models are really critical, especially in healthcare, right? Because you could do the best thing for a patient. If the healthcare system is not willing to pay for it, you're not going to create a market for it, right? And so it's really critical to understand that side of the ecosystem. And there's also there's many stakeholders in a healthcare ecosystem, and everybody, one of them, needs to get something out of this, right? So if you forgo to understand how these kind of reimbursement models work, you're dead in the water. So it's really critical to be very aware of that. I agree. Yeah, we have about 3 minutes. I have any questions from any of the participants that we could cover? I don't think we have any questions, but yeah, thank you so much. This was okay, Saloni dropped in. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Yeah, join for the newsletter. We have many of these things coming up. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Tina. Thanks, Tucker. I know you guys all have busy lives, so really appreciate us joining us today. And Glenn, yeah, if we get anybody reaching out on specific questions, we can loop them back to you and take next steps. But thanks so much, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Good to meet you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.